Brick by Brick by Charles R. Smith, Jr., illustrated by Floyd Cooper. Dedicated to all the slaves who helped build this country from the ground up. In memory of my great-grandparents, Ricey and Mattie Banks. Under a hazy, hot summer sun, many hands work together as one. The president of a new country needs a new home, so many hands work together as one. Black hands, white hands, free hands, slave hands. Slave hands dig, saw, and break stone, laying the foundation for the president's home. Rented as property, slave hands labor as diggers of stones, sawyers and bricklayers. Diggers swing axes to break up stone, laying the foundation for the president's home. Jerry, Jess, Charles, Len, Dick, Bill, Harry, Jim. Slave hands swing axes 12 hours a day, but slave owners take slave hands' pay. Slave hands sweat under a bright sun. Slave hands toil until each day is done. Chiseling, carving, and transporting stone, slave hands ache, dark skin to white bone. Slave hands blister under bright, hazy sun. Slave hands toil until each day is done. Sawyers saw blades through logs of oak wood, 7 days a week where a forest once stood. Alec, Ben, William, Moses, Simon, Peter, Frank, Thomas. Up, down, push, pull, 2 men per pit saw. Spraying sawdust until slave hands are raw. Slave hands saw 12 hours a day, but slave owners take slave hands' pay. Slave hands bleed under a hot, hazy sun. Slave hands toil until each day is done. Clay, sand, and water is mixed by young slave hands to create brick. Nameless, faceless, daughters and sons build brick by brick until each day is done. Oyster shells mixed with rock, lime, and sand become a mortar for bricks spread by slave hands. Will, Nace, Gerard, Manuel. Liverpool, Lester, Hermit, Samuel. Slave hands spread mortar 12 hours a day, but slave owners take slave hands' pay. Slave hands crack under a hot, hazy sun. Slave hands toil until each day is done. Slave hands learn new trade skills using chisels, saws, hammers, and drills. Skilled hands earn 1 shilling per day, reaching slave hands closer to freedom with pay. Brick by brick, slave hands build. Day by day, slave hands gain skill. Month by month, slave hands toil, planting seeds of freedom in fertile soil. Freedom has a price in a land of liberty, so slave hands toil to no longer be property. Brick by brick, where a forest once stood, grows the president's home made of stone and oak wood. Slave hands build and slave hands save shillings to be free and no longer a slave. Slave hands count shillings with worn fingertips and purchase freedom earned brick by brick. Why were slaves used to build the White House? So there's a picture of the White House. Why were slaves used to build the White House? Today we know that the White House exists in the big city of Washington, D.C., but when construction began in 1792, it was in the middle of nowhere. Manpower was needed to clear the forest, build the house, and make all the fine details inside. Lots of manpower. Local workers, including immigrants from Scotland and other countries, were hired, as well as free blacks, but it wasn't enough. That's where slaves come in. After realizing there weren't enough workers in the population to assist in the construction, the government looked to slaves to round out the workforce. Slave owners from Virginia and Maryland received $5 a month to rent out each slave. After a hard day of work, slaves returned to a small, shared hut and ate from the rations of pork, beef, and cornmeal provided to them. Slaves endured a snake-infested island and mosquito swarms to dig up the stones needed for the walls of the house. They endured hour and after hour of cutting and trimming wood, often until their hands were bloodied and deformed. The work was hard on the body, especially the hands. I chose to focus on the hands because all of the work was done at a time when machines didn't exist to do some of the same jobs. Hand is also another name of a laborer or worker. Thus, many slaves exist to do those same jobs. Thus, many slaves were needed to turn a wooded forest into our country's most famous address. As the house began to be completed on the outside, skilled workers were needed to finish the inside. Skilled craftsmen from other countries taught the slaves trades such as cabinet making and carpentry. These skills allowed the slaves a chance to earn money and eventually pay for their freedom. Unfortunately, the original White House was burned down by the British on the night of August 24, 1814, during the most dramatic episode of the War of 1812. It was later rebuilt and restored to its original condition and stands as a reminder of the contribution made by slaves who worked toward freedom brick by brick. This was written by Charles R. Smith, Jr.